Huh?
Yeah. Because you're the son. And then it's up to you to pass it on if you want. Sorry. I put it in the office.
Is everybody here that you're expecting?
I
Or
think
you
so.
mentioned anybody that we should be waiting for?
I don't see Rick and Kathy, but
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
Remember when Jack was that?
I feel like he should be up here.
And he got in trouble.
Our cousin is
Oh, I just said that
But
right
I
there.
don't, I understand
Yeah,
that
what
they
if
have
you
to
sit right
walk
in the second
through.
row?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. I'll invite him up. Thank you.
No, no, no. I don't, I should have asked him.
Oh, you're not. Okay, well, there's seats right here. No, okay, good. I thought I heard her say weather. I did, I heard her say weather.
So I do, because you're the closest living relative that's here. I don't believe you out. That's, you had a trip up here. And I'm sure Dad will like it.
Well, if you guys are ready, we can begin.
Yes.
Okay?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming today. My name's Lindsay. I'm one of the directors here at Reynolds-Jonkhoff, and on behalf of Jerry's family, thank you so much for coming. If you have a cell phone, if you could just take it out real quick and silence it so it won't ring during our services today, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. And to start our services today, we are going to pay tribute to his time in the Navy, and it's my honor to introduce our American Legion and our VFW, who will be coming forward to lead honors, as well as members of our active duty armed forces. Gentlemen and ladies.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Kirkwood, and I happen to be a Navy veteran from the 50s and 60s, too, also. We are your honor guard, and it is our honor to be here on this day. We volunteers represent the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 2780, and the American Legion, Post number 35, also here in Traverse City. Our United States Navy Honor Guard will be here today. They are behind us here today. They will be presenting our nation's flag. Our buglers today are David McIntosh and Mike Hunter. Today, we are here to honor Jerry Allen Zachary. Jerry entered service in the United States Navy August the 19th, 1950, the very beginning of the Korean War. After Jerry's basic training at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, he went on to A School. I believe he started there in May of 1951. And his military occupation status was printer. Jerry worked in all facets of printing: publications, presses, binding, linotype, systems, total systems, composition, and proofreading. That was his expertise while he served. Jerry spent 3 years and 6 months overseas aboard the USS Dixie. The USS Dixie was a destroyer tender, approximately 530 feet long, by about 70 feet wide at the beam. The Dixie task was to serve frontline destroyers in or near battle areas to keep them fit for duty. The Dixie earned 5 battle stars during her career in the Korean waters. Jerry was also a veteran of our Cold War. This is our nation's longest war, if you will. It started in 1946, right at the end of World War II, and it continued, ending on December the 31st, 1990. Jerry received some awards here and medals. National Defense Service Ribbon, United Nations Service Ribbon, and the Korean Service Medal with battle stars. One thing I will say about his field is what he did. He serviced other ships. In other words, when you see a destroyer tender, it might be parked, there might be 5 to 6 destroyers right alongside of it, tied right up together, and you go from one destroyer to the other to get to the Dixie. And the Dixie would be anchored out or tied, whatever, however they wanted to put it. So they supported these other destroyers in terms of what they needed to have things printed and binded or whatever the case may be. It was a very important job, and I'm sure Jerry did it well. To serve under the nation of this nation is a privileged duty of every able-bodied American. And we have come here today to pay our respects to one who had the privilege to do so, to honor service to our country. Proudly we remember his service, and it is because of men and women like Jerry that we all live in a land of freedom and peace, justice, and hopefully tranquility. And may our ceremonies of today deepen our reverence for our honored comrade and our friend and our loved one. I can assure you that Jerry believed in Americanism. Americanism is this. It's an unfailing love of country, loyalty to its institutions and ideals, and eagerness to defend it against all enemies, an undivided allegiance to our flag, and a desire to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Honorably, Jerry served our country, as we know, in the United States Navy. A very proud individual in that branch. And it is because of men and women like Jerry, who when they served had a creed in which they lived by. And it is the same creed that our sailors of today follow. It's called the Sailor's Creed. I am a United States sailor. I will defend and support the Constitution of the United States of America and obey the laws lawfully of those appointed over me. I represent the fighting spirit of the United States Navy and those who have gone before me to defend freedom and democracy all around the world. I am committed to excellence and fair treatment of all, and I will be professional, wearing my uniform with pride and accepting responsibilities for my actions. I will set excellence as my standard. I'll always strive for ways to make me a better sailor and my crew a better crew. In Latin, Semper Fortis, always strong. We trust the example set by Jerry will prove to be a glorious beacon to the youth of our country, who may be called upon to honor our flag. So let us pledge ourselves anew and pick up the banner laid down by Jerry and continue his march to face the challenges that confront us in this everyday life and support protection for all those left behind. And let us so live that when the keeper of eternal records shall have called our names for the last time, those we leave behind may say of us, as we now say of Jerry, here lies all that is mortal of a true-hearted comrade and a fearless defender of his country and of his flag. At this time, we will have a rifle salute, followed by taps. When the sounding of taps is heard, please rise, and if you are a veteran, please render a salute. Honor guard, post. Please rise. Please be seated.
Please accept this flag as a symbol of appreciation for your father's knowledge and faithful service.
There are many traditions observed at military funerals. The folding of the flag, the sounding of taps, And the rifle volley, they all have significant meanings. The rifle volleys date back to the days of the Napoleonic Wars. The sounding of taps and the rifle volley would be a tradition that we are observing here today. This meant that during the battles, ceasefires were called to each side. They could clear their dead on the battlefield. The firing of the 3 volleys indicated that the dead were cleared and they were properly cared for. Today, after the 3 volleys you just heard, we're going to place 3 empty shell casings in your flag. And this is a reminder that we are to carry on in Jerry's behalf and face the challenges that may confront us in this life.
Like you said, 3 goes inside the flag, okay? And the rest are tokens for your personal as you wish.
Okay, thank you very much.
There is a tradition observed aboard a U.S. naval vessel. It's called piping over the side. I am now going to pipe Zachary, Jerry Zachary, second-class petty officer, departing. Jerry, may you have fair winds and calm seas forever. Thank you very much for your attendance here today. I say to you, God bless every one of you, and thank you. Pastor?
Well, welcome. Moving tribute. It's a great pleasure as well as an honor for me to be with you here today. I think we would agree that life is a precious gift. And we gather here now to celebrate that gift to each of us in the life of Jerry Zachary. He might have been known by other names as well, maybe Dad or Zach or Uncle or even Care Bear, I understand he was known to some. Jer Bear. My name is Dave Anderson. In many respects, I am one of, if not the, most recent friends of Jerry present. In fact, I first met Jerry just a few months ago. I was his hospice chaplain. And while that might not qualify me as a longtime friend, it does afford me the advantage of being able to recall most of all the things that Jerry and I talked about. Some of the highlights of his life, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, maybe even more so than me, and they are shared on the website of the Reynolds-Jonkhoff Funeral Home. I would, certainly commend it to you, but just to touch on some of those things that seem to be significant to me. Jerry was raised in a small Indiana community. His parents were in the business of farming. He grew up during the years of the Depression and World War II. Those were times we almost can't relate to if you're from my generation. He enjoyed sports in school. We've seen some pictures of him in his basketball uniforms. He was president of his high school class. And it was during those years, either in high school or a little before, that he met the love of his life, Nancy. Soon after that time, he went to work, got his first maybe taste of the printing industry by working as a bookbinder for R.R. Donnelley. I'm from Chicago, and I know R.R. Donnelley is headquartered there. Today they're a huge Fortune 500 international conglomerate. So that was a really cool job. And then the Korean War came along, as we've heard referred to today. This was in the area of 1950 or so. My dad was a Korean veteran as well. Young men were being drafted right and left into the Army, and Jerry enlisted in the Navy. He and Nancy got married, were stationed out in San Diego for a while on that destroyer support ship, the destroyer Tender Dixie, that we heard about. Happily, I think for him, I understand his fleet was deployed, and while they were en route across the Pacific, the armistice was declared, and the fleet was recalled. And he made it safe and sound through the war. Was honorably discharged, and then he and Nancy relocated to a little town called Traverse City. Seems their local paper, which was still the Record Eagle back then, needed somebody with some printing expertise. Isn't that interesting that he would learn his trade, his life's trade, while in the Navy? Just don't think of printing as in the Navy, especially linotype printing, which involves like melting lead and stuff, right? I mean, you can't, how do you do that on a rolling ship? I don't know, but I guess they do. So a lot of the rest is maybe a little bit more familiar to most of the people in this room. Jerry and Nancy raised a family. Sam and Amy were born to them in the early 60s. And he got to enjoy the many benefits of living in this area. He loved the outdoors. He loved fishing. He loved big game hunting with his friends. He enjoyed mushrooming. We've seen all those things borne out in a variety of pictures that we've seen this morning before the service began. He was a busy man. He worked for the Record Eagle for 35 years. In addition to being a husband and a father, he became a licensed charter boat captain, piloting boats out of Leland and Frankfurt and on Grand Traverse Bay. He was a high school basketball referee. He worked games in the evenings all over northern Michigan. After retiring from printing, he even did some vehicle transports for the Fox Motor Group here in town. He was not a guy just to sit around idly and twiddle his thumbs. But these are just some of the things that he did. What's more important, and what's most important, is not what he did, but who Jerry was. Jerry the person. And at this time, I'd like to invite people who knew him best to share some thoughts or memories of what made Jerry so special. And Sam is going to start us off, if that's good. Thanks.
Well, nice to see everybody here today, and I'm sure Jerry would be glad to see y'all. Everybody's telling me, and saying, yeah, I'm so sorry you lost your dad. And I tell them, after a while of that, I'm like, you know what? He's kind of still around here quite a bit in memory, We take a closer look at his life and everything now, more so than, well, especially the last few years of his life when he was, tied up being old and in bed and, having memory troubles and all that stuff. But I says, he's around here quite more than you think. This is his suit. These are his boots. His tie. It just happened that, I kind of like that. And so I said, I think I'll try that on and see how that works. But he actually has left us with so much memory of his life now that, it's hard to compare, like, my life. What have I done? Did I do anything like that? Well, I'll take a closer look at that someday. But now I can still, tell you some of his memories that survived, because his memories, the ones that he had, are still, a lot locked up in all our memories. Like, he remembered when I don't think anybody knows this, but Jerry actually escaped from the circus. He was in the, Little Jerry. Well, I've never called him Little Jerry, ever. But back when there was a Little Jerry, and in the middle of the Depression, he heard the circus was in town, Well, middle of the Depression, family of farmers, they're like, we don't have no money for no tomfoolery going to the circus. So he probably just says, I'm going. So he, either he packed him in a little bag, or his mom said, okay, you're on the way, you're going to need a sandwich, or whatever, and off he went. Anyway, he gets to town, and, he finds it. You couldn't hardly miss it. It was a little town, not much bigger than this building. No, it was bigger than that, but I mean, little town, small town. And he snuck in to the circus, and they caught him. And they put him to work. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. He thought he was going to have a good day. But he probably, they probably didn't kidnap him overnight or anything, but he probably saw, now's my chance, and got out of there, So he's just, he told me about this. He escaped from the circus. So now I like to, after a while I'd like to tell people when he was talking about, well, where are you from? And I'll be around there. I says, you did not. You escaped from the circus. you know. Probably nobody here can claim they escaped from the circus. So that caught up with him, you know. He probably never thought that would catch up with him today, but it did. And, you know, he told me a lot of other stories, and I have a lot of other memories that he had that I would tell back to him. Say, hey, didn't you, you never rode a mule, did you? And he'd be like, no, you're right. We didn't have any mules, you know. No, I can't think of it. But you had horses. Oh, yeah. Rode horses a little bit. And, you know, just small talk of his growing up early in the farm back then. He hates squash to this day. Well, yeah, I'm sure till this day. Because, you know, growing up on a farm in the Depression, you could always count on the squash. You know, it grows like, you know. And so he probably had a lot of squash. He never liked soft butter because it could only get so soft out there in the milk shed with the creek running through it. You know, you didn't have a lot of refrigeration. So soft butter, he probably got a hold of some soft butter that might have been a little bit too old. So he never liked soft butter. But that's okay. He's not the only one in the world that had to put up with those things at that time. But just some of the stuff that he still, parts of his life, which were small hardships then. Because he sounded like, from what I recall, that he had a pretty good childhood overall. He got to learn how to work, in which he did plenty of that. He got to tell me about, you know, putting up the hay in the hay mow. Well, who calls it a hay mow? It looks like a hay mow, but it's a hay mow. But he says he could put the bird shot in the 20 gauge and shoot the pigeons out of the barn, in the barn, because it wouldn't go through the roof. I was like, oh, yeah, brilliant idea. So he told me, we'd talk about a lot of this stuff, and I'd remind him of the stuff that he told me about way back when, and he could grasp that. Now, what happened last week, not so much, which is, you know, I'd tell him stuff about, oh yeah, remember, he showed me how to sharpen a knife. He was right about stuff, because he'd said, when he sharpened it, you know, you got to be really careful and everything. And I says, well, let me feel it. Let me feel it. And he'd say, no, you cut yourself. And, come on, let me feel it. No. And I finally pestered him into doing that, and I thought, I'll feel it really quick so I don't cut myself. And I just laid my finger right open, just like that. He was right. I should have listened to him, you know, but couldn't do it. Same thing, chopping kindling. Showed me how to chop kindling up. So after supper, I wanted to go out and cut some kindling up for the fire. No, you'll hit your knee. No, I won't. And I finally pestered him. You see where this is going. And sure enough, I hit my knee, first swing, right in my knee, and I rolled down this little hill just bawling because, not because my knee hurt, because I told him I would not hit my knee. That's why I was crying. He did it again. He was right again. You know, it's like, how can he do this? It's not his fault, but he was right about stuff, you know. So when it came around later in years, and he's sitting there at the computer, and he starts telling me, you know, I think I'm coming down with Alzheimer's. I'm like, oh no. You know, you're getting older and forgetting stuff. I forget stuff. Names and people. And, you know, by the time the next year went by and he couldn't do the TV clicker anymore, you know. He was right. But like so many other things, he accepted the fact that this is what was happening to him and that he was going to go along with. He didn't fight anything about it. You know, just like he accepted pretty much, he was good at accepting things. That's things the way they were, he'd accept them. And people the way they was, that's the way they was. He didn't have to get all upset because they was a certain way. He had a saying, and it went like this. Don't, just, it's no big deal, on different things. So, I picked up a lot of that stuff throughout my years from him. And, as much as I am different from him, I'm working on this beard thing, because he always had it in his later years till he finally said, this is too much beard. He was looking like Santa Claus, but I got a ways to go with this. And I always thought, what do you mean he looks like Santa Claus? And one year I got a Christmas card from somebody, and there on the cover of the Christmas card was a Santa Claus that looked just like Jerry. And I'm like, oh, I can't believe it. This is what everybody's telling me. Okay, I see it. I see it now. So as far as having his speech all figured out, or his, it's kind of like a eulogy, right? That's what they call them. I can't really cover all his traits and everything all at once, but that's what you people are here for. And maybe somebody else wants to put a word or two in about their experience with Jerry and why he was the guy who would visit with you. I mean, he would go to the neighbors. Just, what are you doing? After dinner, well, let's go over and see so-and-so, and let's go over and see so-and-so. He would go over to see these people. He even got me doing it when he wasn't there. I'd like, well, I'm going to go visit so-and-so and go over and visit with him. And, some of the older neighbors that he had, they really liked that. And I heard a lot of stories from them about, the old days, older days than he had. He was born and went through his era, but these people were even older and had older stories than that. So it was all pretty good part of growing up. And I wish most kids could have a good growing up like that, And that doesn't always happen. So thankfully, there's other people to talk to. And anybody wants to say a few words about their experience with Jerry, it'd be great, because I know he was a fun guy. That color guard is pretty serious stuff, man. It's all gun shy there.
I think Don wants to say a few words.
Great. Come on forward.
No, I should.
Well, hi, folks. I'm Don Beam. I met Jerry in 1978 when I started at the Record Eagle. The first thing he did is invite me to poker. And he said, come on over on Wednesday, we're going to play some poker. And I wasn't a good poker player, but when I got there, I found out that Zach would bring exotic foods to these poker games. Chicken gizzards and squab and mountain oysters. And we always said that whatever happened to walk into his live trap in the backyard ended up an appetizer at the poker games. So that's one little story. I always loved his food was good too. I mean, I ate the mountain oyster before I knew what it was, and it was excellent. So, but at the poker game, he asked me if I fished, and I said, yeah, I love to fish. And he said, come on, let's go fishing together. And so he says, let's go Saturday. I said, that's fine. He says, okay, I'll pick you up at 6. a.m. Well, I'm a morning person. I said, that's fine. Well, Jerry was never on time. He was always early. So at 5:45, he pulls into the driveway with his 14-foot aluminum boat and his 15 horsepower motor and this white and red cooler that always had cold beer. And we'd go out and fish and enjoy his beer, and when we were done, we'd head back to his house, which I considered the most beautiful fish cleaning spot in the world. It was out in his backyard. He had a brick fireplace, a perfect spot to clean the fish. And there was Nancy's groomed beach in West Bay, and it was just absolutely gorgeous there. Over the years, we cleaned an awful lot of fish in that spot. And he taught me how to catch more fish, how to fillet them properly, and the absolute best way to cook them up. And I always appreciated that. He taught me my recipe for venison steaks and bluegills. It was just wonderful. And the other thing that always amazed me is that little shed that he had. He couldn't have a garage at this house on West Bay, zoning or whatever, but he had the shed. It wasn't that big of a shed, but it was the original Home Depot. If you needed anything, any tool, any item, he could walk into that shed and it had that thing in there. Whatever item you needed, he had it in there. And I was amazed, it was like, okay, I need a 2-inch ball, and he'd go back there and find it and come back. And that always amazed me how perfectly organized he had that shed. So, but I spent a lot of time with Zach, and we talked a lot, but we never talked politics or religion. We never solved any world problems. We just talked about what lake we were going to fish next, and what woods we were going to explore, and where to cut more firewood, because Jerry burned firewood year-round. It'd be 90 degrees out. He'd have a fire going in the fireplace. And all the things he did a lot of stuff that I didn't participate in. He knew everybody. It's amazing, go anywhere in Traverse City and people knew Zach and Zach knew them, and he memorized all their names. And I'm not very good at memorizing names, but it would just come to him. And I'm like, how do you remember these people? I don't know. But he did a lot of stuff. And Jerry lived his best life, and I was very happy to be part of that life. He made my life better. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Todd. Well, I'd like to say that Don had met Jerry in '78, and I'm sure he knows that Jerry had a lot of friends like Don. Really good guys, and they're really, really tight friends. They'd somehow gotten into the fishing habit. They knew where the watercress was. The streams, you can pull that out in the spring. And the mushrooms that were out by the fishing holes, in the spring. So you could come back with a whole meal. Not just fish, but everything else, the salad and the appetizers to boot. All his buddies back then in the '60s, I got to know real good. They knew Amy, and because they were over at the house, and we got to go places with them and do things with them. And they was all grade A people. Usually a lot of them from work, but from other places. Like I said, Don said he knew everybody, and everybody knew him. And that was the same way with his dad. Jerry's dad was an auctioneer, and he knew everybody in the counties, the surrounding 3 or 4 counties of where they lived. And besides being a farmer, that was his part-time thing, auctioneering. So he just didn't know other people, he knew families, and they'd talk about all this to people and what was going on with them. And he picked up a lot of that, you know, my dad did. His folks were real religious, and they didn't quite drum the religion out of them as more as they drummed it into him. Because he had a saying, and it's kind of appropriate for these times, that said, you can believe whatever you want, just don't ask me to believe it. It sounds kind of cold, but really, it's accepting of everybody. Believe whatever you want. There's so many religions in the world, and he's not going to go fight against them. He's not going to. That's one thing he didn't do. He had his saying. Yeah, just leave it alone. Everything's fine. And as long as everybody is pretty much happy with what their outlook is, then that's good. If not, maybe somebody can help them be a little more content. But I found that to be a really, really big plus in my life, to take a look at like all the cultures of the world, and even the cultures, the smaller cultures in the city. You have 27 different churches. Well, why is it? Okay, but some people appreciate different things. And I guess we all have different viewpoints, of course, especially not all the same people. And he realized this, and he played that hand to his advantage, because he got along with everybody. I've never seen him have a problem with anybody, really, or sit there and get upset about stuff, to where I know it's easy to get going on something and just get irate, and it's something that doesn't even involve you. Politics. Yeah, he wasn't really into all that much. Wouldn't really strike a chord in it, you know, 'cause I don't know. So, he just managed to maintain his life with everybody, and not be a pain really to anybody. You know, I was pretty fortunate to have him as a father, and sure, there's, you know, other things in life, like when he was young. Oh, how come all our family, and your family, is down there in Indiana, and we're up here? Why don't you, what are we doing up here? At the same time, you know, we'd go visit them, and it'd be great. And they'd come up here, and it'd be great. And, you know, if we was just down there, it'd be like, it's like this all the time. It's just, you know, we wouldn't even know the difference. How great it was, how great family really was. You know, it would have been just, oh yeah, they're up to it again. Or, you know, you know how family stuff gets going. You don't want to get any ruffles stirred up in the mix back then with people not getting along. He'd like to see everybody get along. He's pretty good at that. So, I thought I'd just like to throw all that in there at one time.
That's great.
So let them proceed from here.
I can't see around the corner, but is there anyone else who would like to share anything? Great, sure. Come on up, yeah.
Well, my name is Rick Newman, and my dad's name was Richard Newman, and my dad was one of Zach's hunting buddies. And I never knew he had a first name. It was always Zach, old Zach, or damn you, Zach. And so they hunted and fished quite a bit together. And Zach was quite a practical joker. And so one of the phone would ring at home, and my mom would answer it, and my dad would say, "Who is it?" She said, "That's Zachary. He probably wants you to go on another hunting trip." So they would talk, and they'd plan for months and months, and then they'd finally get the trip together. And I remember this one time my dad was telling the story that they were going up to Saskatchewan. He says, we drove. He says, we drove and we drove and we drove until the road ended. And he said there was this little town there, and had a little hotel and a bar, and Zach said, well, let's go check into the room. And my dad says, sounds great. I'm tired. I'm going to go to bed. And Zach goes, no. He says, let's go have a beer. So he talks Zach into going into the bar for a beer. So they went to the bar, and it was mostly Native Americans there at the time. And so they were the two white guys in the bar there. And so they went up to the bar and had a beer. And Zach saw some gals out on the dance floor dancing. And so he goes, come on, Rich, let's go ask those girls to dance. And my dad goes, Zach, I'm just tired. I just want to go back to the room. No, come on, let's go ask them to dance. So Zach goes out there, my dad goes out there, and Zach taps the one gal on the shoulder, and she turns around, and Zach says, let's dance. And so my dad's looking at the bar, and everybody at the bar is looking at him, wondering what's going on. So my dad taps the taller gal, and the person turned around, and it wasn't a gal at all, it was a guy. So my dad looks up and goes, oh, like this. And of course, everybody at the bar was laughing, and it was one of those damn you, Zachs, And so, anyway, my dad was never a bird hunter. He didn't really know, much about birds, but Zach talked him into going bird hunting. So they're out there bird hunting, and I think they're quail hunting or something like that. And so my dad's trying to shoot a bird. He can't figure out how to shoot a bird. And Zach goes, don't worry, Rich, I've got a bunch of birds in my game pouch. I've got a couple of quails here, and I'll cook one up for you tonight. So my dad said, okay. So they got back to camp, and so my dad's sitting at the table there, and Zach's over in the pan frying up the bird, and he brings it over to my dad, and he sets it on a plate. And my dad goes, man, that's a small piece of meat, And he said, oh, that's quails aren't very big. So he said, just give it a try. So he's cutting up the bird. He eats the bird. He says, that's pretty good. He says, well, Rich, he says, I hate to tell you, but that wasn't a quail. He says, well, what was it? He says, well, that was a robin. And so he had shot a robin, and he fried it up for my dad, So Zach was quite a practical joker, and he and my father had a great time, and a lot of great hunting stories together, and great fishing stories. And so, and like I said, I never knew his first name was Jerry. It was just Zach, or old Zach, or damn you, Zach, when I was growing up. So anyway, there's some stories about my dad and Zach.
That's great. Thanks. Anybody else? Kind of on a roll here. Well, thanks for sharing, you guys. As one who's privileged to pastor to hospice patients and their families, I'm able to meet and talk with people who are living out the final season of their lives. And in that setting, human relationships are often really fragile things. The burdens of extended illnesses can place strains on the strongest bonds, even in, and sometimes even especially in families. When marriage vows are exchanged, very few of us when we say for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Not very many of us really understand what that means and how that can play itself out. They speak of faithfulness and commitment and dedication. And that kind of dedication really calls for the strongest kind of love between people. When people get married, we might say they're in love, and how we understand that is important. When we think of in love, we think, of a kind of a romantic feeling maybe. It's an emotion that kind of accompanies a successful marriage. But in its proper context, we come to understand, as tough times come along, that love is really a verb. It bespeaks an action. And in mature love, the emotions follow the actions. There was a lot in the last few years of Jerry and Nancy's life together that might be described as sad or even tragic in some ways. There were tough times, and I doubt if either one of them had the ability to write the script of their life, they would have chosen the path that they were called to walk together. And yet through that, there was a wellspring of love and the joy that accompanied it. And Jerry was just as much in love with his wife 2 weeks ago as he ever was, maybe even more so. And she passed in 2018.
You kept asking if she's coming home.
Love perseveres for 68 years and beyond. In the very short time I've gotten to spend with Sam and Amy, it's apparent that their family shares a commitment to each other, to one another, that speaks of compassion and respect and the kind of love that I think we know Jerry had. Those values don't just spring up overnight. They're taught, they're modeled, they're learned. They're kind of like seeds that you plant and you water and, you nurture them, and then they bloom. And relationships like theirs speak of and teach us about commitment and faithfulness. And we see these things reflected in the life of Jerry. It's said that the measure of a person's life isn't the monuments that get erected in their name, nor in a balance sheet of things they've accumulated or acquired that they can be proud of, but rather it's the number of lives that God touches through them. We all have heard that Jerry wasn't a religious guy, maybe in the traditional sense, but he knew God. He told me so. He felt closer to God out on the water or in the woods than he did in a building full of people. Jerry loved his life. He was thankful for his life, and he loved and was thankful for the people in it. He was such a people lover. And each of us has been privileged to see God at work in our very midst through Jerry, in the example he set, in the love he gave, in the joy he inspired that you could hear in people's memories. When we're living at our very best, we're conduits of God's grace and His goodness. It passes through us to the people around us. And like a favorite tool in the hand of a master craftsman, God is going to continue to use Jerry to impact lives through the people he's touched and guided and cared for, including every one of us that's here. We're his living legacy, like Sam said. It's even visible with his suit, right, and his tie. Yeah. And for that, we're very, very, very grateful. I'd like to just close with some lines written by a guy that many of you might know. His name's Robert Louis Stevenson. He's a great author. This is a little poem that just reminded me of Jerry, and Robert Louis Stevenson actually had this engraved on his tombstone after he passed. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me die. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. So thank you, God, and thank you, Jerry, for all the joy, for all the memories, for all the lessons so well taught that'll be remembered from a life so well lived. Amen. God bless everyone who's here. The family would like to invite you to continue in fellowship with the light reception that you noticed and you wanted to eat before coming in, but now you actually can, out around the corner. Thank you so much for being here.